The scorching Texas sun beat down on the asphalt as John Anderson parked his cruiser in the handicapped space in front of the local cafe. His eyes, accustomed to scanning the horizon for threats during his years of military service, now roamed the quiet street on a routine patrol. The disabled veteran license plates on his car gleamed in the bright light, a silent reminder of the sacrifices he had made for his country. John adjusted the collar of his uniform, still getting used to the weight of the badge on his chest. After years of serving in the Army and months of intensive training at the police academy, he was finally realizing his dream of continuing to serve his community, now as a law enforcement officer. With a deep sigh, he got out of the car, his right leg responding a little slower, a constant reminder of the explosion that had almost cost him his life in Afghanistan. While walking towards the cafe, John noticed a patrol car approaching. His instinct, honed by years of experience, told him something was wrong. The vehicle stopped abruptly, and two officers got out, their faces tense and postures aggressive. "Hey, you there!" shouted one of the officers, a burly man with graying hair at his temples. "What do you think you're doing in this position?" John turned around calmly, his hands visible and away from his gun. "Good afternoon, officers," he replied in a firm but respectful voice. "Can I help you?" The second officer, younger and visibly nervous, approached. "You can't park here. This is a handicapped spot." John nodded, remaining calm. "Yes, I know. I'm a disabled veteran. My car has the proper plates." The older officer frowned, his eyes raking John up and down. "You don't look disabled to me. Let me see your identification." It was at this moment that John felt a familiar wave of frustration and indignation. How many times had he faced this kind of prejudice? How many times had his disability, invisible to the eye, been questioned? "With all due respect," Officer John replied, his voice calm but firm, "I am not required to present my identification without justifiable reason. I am legally parked in a space designated for me." The older officer stepped forward, his stance intimidating. "Listen here, boy. When an officer asks for your identification, you present it. Got it?" John took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of training and experience in his next words. "Officer, I understand your position, but I also know my rights. I am a newly minted police officer and a military veteran. My disability may not be visible, but that doesn't make it any less real." A tense silence fell over the group. The younger officer looked uncomfortable, his eyes switching between John and his older partner. "Are you calling yourself a police officer?" the older officer asked, incredulity evident in his voice. "Prove it." John slowly reached for his badge, keeping his movements deliberate and visible. "Here's my badge, officer. I'm Officer John Anderson, recent academy graduate." The older cop examined the badge, his face a mix of surprise and something John couldn't quite decipher, shame perhaps, or resentment. "Why didn't you say that before?" the older officer grumbled, handing back the badge. "Because it shouldn't be necessary," John replied calmly. "No citizen should be subjected to questioning without just cause, police or otherwise." It was at that moment that John noticed a small crowd forming. Curious and worried faces watched them from the cafe windows and nearby sidewalks. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of years of distrust between the community and the police hanging over them. "Look," John continued, his voice now softer but no less firm, "I understand that you're doing your job. But we also have a responsibility to build trust in our community. What happened here today, that's not help." The younger officer nodded slowly, seeming to understand. But the older man just frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Let's go, partner," he muttered, turning to head back to the patrol car. As he watched them leave, John felt a mix of emotions: relief, frustration, and renewed determination. This incident, he realized, was just the tip of the iceberg. How many others in the community face similar discrimination on a daily basis? John looked around, noticing the looks of admiration and gratitude on the faces of the people who had witnessed the confrontation. An elderly woman approached him, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, officer," she said softly. "It's good to see someone who understands." John smiled gently at her, feeling the weight of his responsibility more than ever. "We're in this together," he replied. "All of us." As he walked into the cafe, John knew this incident was just the beginning. He had chosen to wear the uniform to make a difference, to be the change he wanted to see. And now, more than ever, I was determined to fulfill this mission. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee surrounded him as he sat at a table near the window. Picking up his phone, John began typing, documenting the incident in detail. He knew this wouldn't be the last time he faced prejudice, even within his own ranks. But he was prepared for the fight to come. Because for John Anderson, being a police officer wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about justice, equality, and building bridges in a long divided community. And he was ready to take on this challenge one day at a time. Understood. I will continue the story with Chapter 2, maintaining the scriptwriter's style and characteristics as described. Here is the second chapter. The sun was already setting when John Anderson finally arrived home after his shift. The incident at the cafe still weighed heavily on his mind, a constant reminder of the long road ahead. Upon entering his modest apartment, he was greeted by the excited bark of Max, his faithful canine companion and service dog. "Hey buddy," John murmured, stroking Max's ears. The Labrador, trained to help him on difficult days, seemed to sense his owner's tension. He pressed his nose against John's hand, offering silent comfort. John slumped onto the worn couch, feeling every muscle in his body protest. It wasn't just physical tiredness, the emotional weight of the day consumed him. Closing his eyes, he relived the confrontation, the expressions of disbelief and disdain on the other officers' faces. It was a battle he knew well. Not just as a police officer, but as a black man in a society that often judged him before he even met him. The soft sound of notifications on your phone brought you back to reality. John picked up the device, his eyes widening as he saw the flood of messages and comments. The video he had posted on his social media, detailing the incident, had gone viral. "My God," he muttered, scrolling through the screen. Supportive comments were mixed with messages of hate and disbelief. His phone rang, his sister Sarah's name flashing on the screen. Sarah's voice was thick with concern. "I saw the video. Are you okay?" John sighed, feeling the knot in his stomach tighten. "I'm fine, Sarah. Nothing I haven't faced before." "But it's different now," Sarah insisted. "You're one of them. That should mean something." "It should," John agreed, his voice low. "But changing such an entrenched system won't be easy." After hanging up, John found himself staring at his reflection in the phone's dark screen. The face looking back at him was that of a determined but tired man. A man who had faced battles in foreign lands only to return home to a different but equally important war. A soft bark from Max brought him out of his thoughts. It was time for his evening walk, a routine that helped both dog and owner decompress. John stood up, taking Max's collar. The neighborhood streets were quiet, the night air bringing a welcome relief after the heat of the day. As they walked, John noticed curious looks from the neighbors. Some nodded in recognition, others quickly looked away. The video, he realized, had changed something in the dynamics of the community. As he turned a corner, John saw a familiar figure. It was Mr. Thompson, a respected community leader and longtime civil rights activist. Officer Anderson, Mr. Thompson called, his deep voice carrying years of struggle and wisdom. "Can I have a word?" John nodded, guiding Max to the bench where the older man was sitting. Mr. Thompson studied him for a moment, his wise eyes seeming to see beyond the surface. "I saw your video, son," he began. "You stirred a hornet's nest." John sighed. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble, Mr. Thompson. I just..." "Problems, Mr. Thompson interrupted, a wry smile on his lips. "Son, sometimes problems are just what we need to bring about change." The older man leaned forward, his voice lowering. "You have a unique opportunity here, John. 1 foot in the system and 1 foot out. You could be the bridge our community needs." Mr. Thompson's words echoed in John's mind, awakening a mixture of hope and apprehension. But how, he asked. "I'm just a newbie. Who's going to listen to me?" "We will," a female voice interrupted. John turned to see Elena Rodriguez, a civil rights attorney known for her tireless work in the community. Your video, John, it resonated with a lot of people. You are not alone in this fight. Elena joined them on the bench, her eyes shining with determination. We are organizing a community meeting to discuss police reform. Your voice, your experience, could be crucial. John felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. It was more than he had imagined when he posted the video, but deep down he knew it was necessary. It won't be easy, he warned. There will be resistance both within the department and outside. Mr. Thompson placed a comforting hand on John's shoulder. Son, change is never easy, but it is necessary, and you have something that many don't. You see both sides. As the night progressed, the three continued their discussion, outlining plans and strategies. John felt a renewed energy rising within him. It was no longer just about his personal incident, it was about an opportunity to create real, lasting change. As he said goodbye and continued his walk with Max, John reflected on the path ahead. He knew he would face challenges, both personal and professional. There would be those who would see him as a traitor, others who would question his motivations. But as he looked at the streets of his community, at the homes and families he had sworn to protect, John felt his resolve strengthen. This was his mission now, not just to enforce the law, but to work to make it truly fair for everyone. Back at his apartment, John turned on his computer. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he began typing. It was time to turn your experiences and ideas into concrete action. He began writing a detailed proposal for reform and training within the police department, focusing on bias awareness, community engagement, and accountability. The hours passed unnoticed as John worked, his determination growing with each written word. When he finally lay down, the sky was already beginning to lighten with the first rays of dawn. As sleep enveloped him, John knew the next day would bring new challenges. But for the first time in a long time, he felt truly hopeful. Change was coming, and he was ready to lead the way. Understood. I will continue the story with Chapter 3, maintaining the scriptwriter's style and characteristics as described. Here is the third chapter. The sun had barely risen when John Anderson arrived at the police station. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel the eyes of the other officers following him as he walked through the halls. Some looked away, avoiding eye contact, while others stared at him openly, their faces a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. John held his head high, his straight posture reflecting years of military training. He knew his decision to expose the incident and propose reforms had created waves. Now he was about to face the consequences. But Anderson, Captain Roberts' voice thundered through the hall. In my office. Now. John took a deep breath, adjusted his uniform, and followed the captain. The room was small and stuffy, the walls covered in recognition plaques and old photos. Captain Roberts, a burly man with graying hair and piercing eyes, sat heavily in his chair, gesturing for John to sit down. Do you have any idea what a fuss you caused? The captain began, his voice low and controlled but filled with suppressed anger. John met the captain's gaze, standing firm. Sir, I understand that my action may have caused discomfort, but... Discomfort, the captain interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. Anderson, you've exposed our department to public scrutiny. We have reporters camped out there, City Hall is pressuring us, and the union is up in arms. John felt a knot form in his stomach, but he maintained his composure. Captain, with all due respect, what happened that day was wrong. We cannot ignore the problems within our own department if we want to effectively serve and protect our community. Captain Roberts studied him for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. You're idealistic, Anderson. That can be dangerous in this job. Or it could be just what we need, Sir John replied calmly. A tense silence fell over the room. John could hear the clock ticking on the wall, every second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the captain sighed, running a hand over his tired face. Look, Anderson, I understand where you're coming from, but you need to understand that change takes time. You can't just turn everything upside down overnight. John nodded slowly. I understand that, sir, but we have to start somewhere. The community is asking for change, and we have the opportunity to lead that process. Captain Roberts stared at him for a moment longer before nodding. Okay, you'll have your chance to present your ideas, but be prepared, Anderson. Not everyone will receive them well. Leaving the captain's room, John felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. He had been given a chance, but he knew the road ahead would be difficult. Throughout the day, John felt the weight of his colleagues' gazes. Some approached, offering words of support in hurried whispers. Others avoided him completely, creating a vacuum around him. During his patrol, John noticed a change in the streets as well. People waved at him, some even stopped to thank him. An elderly woman held his hand, tears in her eyes, thanking him for giving a voice to the voiceless. But not all reactions were positive. At one point, while investigating an incident, John heard insults muttered by a group of young people. "Traitor," they hissed, eyes filled with distrust and anger. Night fell, and John found himself at the local community center again, this time for the meeting organized by Elena and Mr. Thompson. The room was packed. Eager and hopeful faces turned towards him as he took to the small makeshift stage. "Good evening, everyone," John began, his voice firm despite the nervousness he felt. "We are here today because we believe that change is possible and necessary." As he spoke, sharing his experiences and renovation ideas, John felt the energy in the room shift. There was a palpable sense of hope and determination in the air. "It won't be easy," he concluded. "There will be resistance, there will be challenges. But together as a united community, we can create a justice system that truly serves and protects everyone." The applause that followed was deafening. People stood up, some with tears in their eyes, others with fists raised in solidarity. After the meeting, while helping to organize the chairs, John was approached by a young man. The boy, no more than a teenager, looked at John with a mixture of admiration and fear. "Officer Anderson," he began hesitantly. I wanted to be a police officer, but after seeing how things are, I didn't know if there was a place for someone like me." John placed a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. "What's your name?" "Marcus," the boy replied. "Marcus," John said, looking him in the eyes. "That's exactly why we need people like you. To make a difference from within, it won't be easy, but it's worth fighting for." Marcus's hesitant smile was like a ray of sunshine, lighting up his young face with renewed hope. Later that night, exhausted but determined, John sat in his apartment, Max lying faithfully at his feet. His phone rang, Sarah's name flashing on the screen. How it was, her sister asked anxiously. John smiled, feeling a mixture of tiredness and hope. "That was a start, Sarah. A good start." As he prepared for bed, John reflected on the day. It had been difficult, challenging, sometimes even scary, but it had also been inspiring. He had seen the potential for real change. He had felt the hope in the people around him. Lying in bed, John knew the days ahead would be even more challenging. There would be more resistance, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was truly making a difference. With this sense of renewed purpose, John closed his eyes, ready to face whatever tomorrow brought. The fight for justice and equality was just beginning, and he was determined to see it through to the end. Understood. I will write Chapter 4, the final chapter of the story, maintaining the scriptwriter's style and characteristics as described. Here is the last chapter. The rising sun painted the sky with golden hues when John Anderson arrived at City Hall. The imposing building, normally a symbol of power and bureaucracy, today seemed to vibrate with a different energy. A diverse crowd gathered on the steps, signs held high, voices united in chants of hope and change. John felt a lump in his throat as he saw familiar faces in the crowd. Mr. Thompson, Elena, Marcus, they were all there, along with hundreds of other community members. His eyes met those of Sarah, his sister, who nodded encouragingly. Beside him, Captain Roberts looked uncomfortable but determined. "Are you ready for this?" Anderson, the captain, asked, his voice a mix of concern and grudging respect. John nodded, adjusting his tie. "I wasn't in uniform today. This was not a battle to be fought behind a badge. As ready as I can be, sir." As they climbed the steps, the crowd parted, creating a path. John felt the weight of each look, the hope and expectation almost palpable in the air. Outstretched hands touched his arm, offering silent support. Inside the council chamber, the buzz of the crowd was muted, but the tension remained. John saw familiar faces: the mayor, council members, community leaders. And there, sitting quietly in the back, was the officer who had approached him on that fateful day. Their eyes met briefly, a complex mix of emotions passing between them. The mayor, a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes, called the session to order. "We are here today," he began, his voice echoing in the silent chamber, "to discuss the reform proposals presented by Officer John Anderson." John stood up, feeling the weight of countless hopes and fears on his shoulders. Taking a deep breath, he began. "Ladies and gentlemen of the council, citizens of our community, I stand before you today not only as a police officer, but as a member of this community, a member who has seen and experienced firsthand the challenges we face." His voice, initially shaky, gained strength as he continued. John spoke about his experience as a veteran, as a black man navigating an often unjust system, and as a police officer dedicated to making a difference. "What I propose today is not a revolution, but an evolution," John explained, detailing his plans for enhanced bias awareness training, greater community engagement, and a robust accountability system. As he spoke, John could feel the atmosphere in the room changing. He saw heads nodding, eyes widening with understanding, even some of the more skeptical council members seeming to consider his words. When he finished, a momentary silence fell over the room, soon broken by a wave of applause. The mayor had to bang the gavel several times to restore order. "Thank you, Officer Anderson," the mayor said, his voice carrying a new tone of respect. "Now we will hear other witnesses." One by one, community members stood up to speak. Stories of injustice and fear intertwined with accounts of officers who went beyond the call of duty, creating a rich and complex tapestry of shared experiences. Elena presented statistical data supporting the need for reform, her passionate voice echoing through the chamber. Mr. Thompson spoke with the wisdom of decades of activism, linking the current struggle to a long history of seeking justice. And then, to everyone's surprise, the officer who had approached John that day stood up to speak. I made a mistake," he began, his voice shaky. "I let my biases guide my actions, and in the process I did something unforgivable. I fully support these reforms. It's time we do better." John felt a rush of emotion upon hearing those words. It was more than he could have expected. It was the real beginning of change. Hours passed as the council deliberated. John waited anxiously, surrounded by his community. Finally, the mayor called everyone back to order. After careful consideration, the mayor announced the council has voted to approve Officer Anderson's proposed reforms, effective immediately. The chamber erupted in applause and screams of joy. John felt arms around him: Sarah, Elena, Mr. Thompson, even Captain Roberts, all celebrating this shared victory. But John knew this was just the beginning. As they walked out onto the steps of City Hall, where the crowd was anxiously waiting, he prepared to face a new phase of his journey. The midday sun was shining brightly as John addressed the crowd. "Today," he began, his voice carrying far, "we took an important step toward a more just future. But the real work starts now. We need to turn these words on paper into real actions, into tangible changes on our streets and in our hearts." Looking at the faces around him, faces full of hope, determination, and yes, still some skepticism, John felt a surge of renewed purpose. "It won't be easy," he continued. "There will be resistance, there will be setbacks. But if we stand together, if we continue to fight for what we believe in, we can create a community where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued." In the months that followed, John worked tirelessly to implement the reforms. There were moments of frustration, nights when he questioned whether he was making a difference. But there were also moments of triumph: the first group of officers completing new awareness training, the launch of a community policing program, the drop in complaint rates against the police. A year after that fateful day, John found himself again on that same corner where it all began. But this time I wasn't alone. By his side were officers and members of the community united in an event to bring police and citizens together. As he watched children playing with smiling officers, seniors sharing stories with attentive recruits, John felt a surge of emotion. Change was slow, sometimes painfully slow. But it was happening, one heart at a time, one mind at a time. Marcus, now a cadet at the police academy, approached John, a wide smile on his young face. "Officer Anderson," he said, "I just wanted to say thank you for showing that it's possible to make a difference." John smiled, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "We are all part of this change, Marcus. Together we are building the future we dream of." As the sun set over the city, painting the sky with hopeful hues, John looked around and saw not just a community, but a family. A family united in the search for justice, equality, and a better tomorrow for all. And in that moment, John Anderson knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because true change, he had learned, begins with a single act of courage and grows through the strength of community. The future, although uncertain, has never looked brighter.